Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in our virtual Walk with the Future Doc. So my name is Lauren, and I'm a third-year medical student at WVU. I was just going to take a couple minutes to give everyone a little overview of what to expect as we walk together for the next hour. So today we have Dr. Canarella Lorenzetti joining us to talk about the topic of Are We Asleep Yet? Chasing the Elusive Zzz. And then as we walk together virtually, we'll open up the conversation for questions. Everyone should have received a pop-up notification through Zoom just to consent to the audio recording of this walk, and only the audio portion of the walk will be made available publicly on our YouTube channel, which is WVU Walk with the Future Doc. And then also wanted to mention that our Facebook page is the same name, which is WVU Walk with the Future Doc. And this is the best place to look for updates and information about our future walks. So thank you everyone for joining us. Now I'd like to introduce everyone to Dr. Canarella Lorenzetti. She's a professor of family medicine and associate dean at the WVU School of Medicine Eastern Campus. She is a certified culinary medicine specialist, and she leads the culinary and lifestyle medicine track for WVU. So we're really excited to have her joining us today. And with that said, I'll let her begin.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Hopefully you all have had a good night's sleep and are raring to go. And those of us that are up and walking at 9 probably are larks. It's interesting, there are these tests online that you can take a little test to see if you're a lark or an owl. I'm definitely a lark, up usually around 6:30, and then go to bed around 10. The questions are pretty simple, and they really just have you focus on when is your most productive time. So like last night, I went to bed around 10:30, but I was up at 6:30 and kind of reviewed some notes for the talk. So you have to figure out when's your most productive time for learning and working. So sleep, some people think of it as a guilty pleasure, but we all know it's an absolute necessity, which often gets overlooked. And the CDC calls insufficient sleep a health care epidemic. So we should be sleeping about a third of our lives. Of course, that varies a little bit with age, right? Kids sleep a lot more, older patients sleep a little less. But sleep is such an elusive entity for so many people. If you look at some of the statistics, they'll say things like 70% of Americans will say at least once a month they have trouble sleeping. 25% will say half the time they have trouble sleeping. And 11% will say they never sleep well every night. Now, there's lots of reasons why people don't sleep well, and we're not going to get into all of those today. Sleep apnea is one of the most important. That's 25% of people. And people with chronic insomnia, another 11%. But there's a myriad of other reasons, such as restless legs, chronic pain, post-op status, injuries, new motherhood, sick babies, etc., test taking, lots of other reasons why you might not be sleeping well occasionally. The interesting thing is it is such a pervasive problem, but a national survey revealed that 60% of adults will say that a physician has never asked them about their sleep. And then turning the tables, 20%, less than 20% of patients have brought it up to their doctors as an issue. So I do think it's a responsibility for us as healthcare providers and family and friends to ask people when they're being extra grouchy or having trouble remembering something. Hey, how are you sleeping? Tell me about it. So, we read a really good book in the culinary and lifestyle track. The third year students read it on their Christmas vacation. It's called Why We Sleep, and the author is Matthew Walker. It's a great book, easy to read. He's a neuroscientist that has spent years in sleep research. Now, he's not a physician or a healthcare provider per se, so he doesn't have a lot of answers, but he certainly helps us understand um, the physiology of sleep and the effects on our bodies. He gives lots of examples in his book. And if you don't feel like reading the book, you can look at YouTube, and there's several talks by him, TED Talks and others that last about an hour, where he hits some of the highlights of his book. He talks through multiple metabolic and immune pathways and explains them. So, a couple of examples from his book that I find particularly interesting is he talks about a national experiment that happens twice a year in the US, involving tens of thousands of people. And that experiment is daylight savings time. So, in the spring, when we put the clock forward and we lose an hour of sleep, there have been registered 25% increase in the number of heart attacks in that first day. And similarly, in the fall, when you turn the clock back and get an extra hour of sleep, there's a 20% decrease in the amount of heart attacks. So why is that? So upon awakening in that area between 6 and 9 a.m., that is the time of highest cardiovascular risk. Because as you are awakening from sleep, you have that rise in heart rate, rise in blood pressure, a surge of cortisol as you get started on your day. The blood vessels are a bit stiffer, the blood is a bit stickier and thicker, and men's testosterone is even at its highest amount. So some people call that the heart attack and stroke time period. And some people say it's not an optimum time for exercise. Now, I know a lot of people that do thrive on exercising in the morning because that is the time when they're personally up and awake. But from reading this, maybe you should at least equilibrate yourself for that little bit of time upon awakening. Another example he gives in the book is school performance. So looking at the hours of the day, 9 to noon is taken by many as the hours of peak performance. So that's where you're mentally sharper, your short-term memory is the best. And one school system started high school at 9 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock in the morning. And they found that the students in their school system had much better school success and higher performance on exams. And then he even gives some of these very specific numbers, like their SATs went up so many points that could make the difference between getting into a good college versus a less prestigious school. So another example of how the peak in the morning, especially for teenagers, is not 7 a.m. for them to be in class. So there are many other examples in the book, which I think is very apropos. And one of them he talks about a lot is telomeres. And for those of you that have ever been at a talk where Dr. Marsh, WVU's main dean, speaks, he often mentions telomeres. They're sort of the measure, the microscopic cellular measure of health. And to refresh people's memory, telomeres are those little caps on the end of chromosomes. And aging can make them fray, but so can unmitigated stress and poor sleep. And the healthier our telomeres are, the younger we are. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that is something that's just another testimonial, even at the microscopic level, how important sleep is. So now we've talked about number one, how sleepy most Americans are, and number two, um, maybe why they are. And you can get a lot more from reading that book or looking at that YouTube. And in looking at it, there's even racial disparities in the realm of sleep medicine, as African Americans are twice as likely to have insufficient sleep. Now, I don't know exactly why that is, but as a provider, it at least tells me that I really need to make sure to ask that question of all my patients, but especially African Americans, just to make sure I'm not missing anybody who might have some sleep problems. So, how do we help our family, friends, and ourselves get better sleep? So, we know that the most important time of sleep is those first couple of hours, especially between the hours of midnight, 3 a.m. Now, that doesn't mean you can stay up till midnight, but in those early hours of sleep, once you go through your 4 to 6 cycles per night, that's when your brain washes out and consolidates important memories and then disregards those that are not important. Um, and it's a good time to sort of seal those important facts. So, the most important thing about sleep is that it be consistent in its timing. We should try to go to bed every night at the same time and to wake up every morning at the same time. And sometimes I know we can't do that because we're preparing for a test or a paper or your kid is sick or what have you. But in general, we should strive for consistency with especially those patients that we see that tell us that they're having trouble. If you're not sure what your personal sleep amount is or the time that's best for you, they suggest on your vacation or downtime or down week that you work, that you like put yourself to bed, say 10, 10:30, 11, and see what time you get up. But you have to do that for a couple days in a row. And before the talk, me and I were talking about how oftentimes I know when I was in school and certainly now in practice, weekends were often used as catch up times because you do get sleep deprived during the week because of many responsibilities and you sleep really late on the weekends. But to be honest, that's really not good for us. And we should try to get into a better habit of regular sleep times, especially important in children. Number two, tell the bedroom should be used only for sleep and romance. Um, I'm amazed how many people um, use the bedroom or the bed to watch TV. So when they are having sleep issues, one of the first things I say is, what are you doing in bed besides sleeping and romance? Because that has to stop. And they even talk about if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back to sleep, don't lay there in bed for an hour or two wide awake. Get up, get out of the bedroom, go someplace else, read a book, wash the dishes, whatever. But don't stay in your bed for hours awake because that just reinforces the fact that you can do that. And that's not what you're supposed to be doing in bed. Thirdly, is the light in the room. And the room has to be kept dark. We have to be thinking about blackout curtains for some people. I know I've had guests in my guest room where I had to hang heavy towels behind my curtains because it wasn't dark enough for the guests to get to sleep. Think about all of the other electronics in your bedroom, like digital clocks, or even a sleep apnea machine has some light. If you absolutely need a light for some of the patients that have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, then that night light should really be at the floor level. So when they get out of bed and look down at their feet, there's some light to guide their path, but not a light that's up further in the room. We know that if you're having trouble with insomnia, um, increasing the time outside during the day with natural daylight, they say 2 hours of outside natural daylight will improve the efficiency of your sleep and decrease the latency time, the time that it takes you to fall asleep. And that the light in the bedroom is more important of a factor than the noise in the bedroom. And it's also more important to regulate circadian rhythm than actual physical activity. So the light comes into play, obviously, because of melatonin, the sleep hormone. And melatonin starts rising for most people shortly after the evening meal and markedly increases between 9 p.m. and midnight. And your body temperature goes down. For some people, melatonin starts increasing as soon as the sun goes down. And they'll say, you know, in the winter, people go to bed earlier than in the summer. And part of that is because it gets dark at 5 or 6 o'clock. So we know that light affects the melatonin. And then you talk about, you know, do some people need a supplement? They talk about supplements can help some people. 1 to 5 milligrams is all you need. I know that you can buy commercial products of 10 to 20. That's really not necessary. And I also read a whole article about which foods are higher in melatonin, which I'm not going to reiterate here, but I can provide it to the staff here that they can post that for you, because I thought that was kind of interesting. And then there's always the question about blue light. And if you go to the American Ophthalmology site, they'll say blue light glasses are not indicated. You basically just need to shut off your electronic equipment. Another hint that they had was what they called the 20-20-20 rule, which means every 20 minutes that you're looking at a computer, maybe doing a project, every 20 minutes you should look away from the computer at an object that's at least 20 feet away and stare at that object for at least 20 seconds. Apparently that kind of refreshes and resnaps things in there. However, I did read an article from Columbia University, which did one of the first randomized controlled trials. Now, the N was small. It was like 14 or 15 people, I think. But they did a randomized controlled trial for blue light glasses. And they did a washout period, et cetera, from the two, like 8 did it, 8 did not, or 8 and 7, I believe. Did it for 4 weeks, had a washout period, switched, did it again for 4 weeks. And they did find that the group that wore the blue light glasses for 2 hours before bedtime did have an improvement in overall sleep quality and the soundness of the sleep, and the report that they felt refreshed. So I think that another study from Houston showed that blue light glasses gave a 50%, 58% increase in melatonin. But I think this Columbia study actually showed outcomes. And we're always talking to the student that once you have outcomes in patients, not just the number increase in melatonin doesn't necessarily transmit into outcomes. So I think the jury is still out on blue light glasses. But honestly, you can buy them for 15 bucks off Amazon. Also about the room is the room temperature and the room environment. We know for a fact that our body heat decreases. And you would think, well, that means I should keep the room warmer. But no, you should keep the room cooler. And 70 is great for most people. There are a lot of people that kick all the blankets off at night, and they actually sell blankets now that absorb body heat. I thought that was interesting. And I've been hearing about weighted blankets. So I read an article and a study about weighted blankets. And weighted blankets, article cited, were especially useful for kids with ADD and autism and adults with anxiety. And the theory behind a weighted blanket is that because it simulates deep touch, it activates the parasympathetics and it lowers your heart rate, which induces the feeling of calmness and kind of puts your body in that rest mode. And it talked about for kids with ADHD that even a 3 to 5 pound blanket on a little kid, that again, that touch keeps them from being distracted from other sensory stimuli like noise. For the adults, they talked about blankets about 20 pounds to help. And here they talk about controlling the temperature of your bedroom is more important than controlling the noise in your bedroom. And then there's definitely truth to a good quality mattress and even new sheets. They talked about how people like to go to bed on crisp new sheets, and that does increase the likelihood that you'll relax when you get to bed. Just a couple more categories. One is habits. Of course, we all know about caffeine. Caffeine's half-life is 5 hours. I try not to drink caffeine after about 2 in the afternoon, so people have to gauge that. Alcohol, a lot of people say, oh, I take alcohol every night because it helps me to sleep. We also know that alcohol is not a good sleep inducer. It's an artificial sleep. It actually decreases melatonin production, and it also decreases the expected surge in human growth hormone, apparently, which has a lot to do with sleep. Same with late night snacks. They interfere hormonally. There is some evidence that low carb diets can improve sleep. I don't have the reference article for that though. And then obviously the foods with tryptophan like milk and turkey have been known to help to induce sleep. Probably one of the hardest things for us to deal with is the patient's anxious mind. So that's one thing I think for sure that we can share in the group chat. How do you empty your mind? You know, meditation, logging, occupying your mind with something else, reading from a book, not an electronic device, deep breathing. I know I had a lot of anxiety and trouble sleeping back 10, 15 years ago when I was taking my MPH and had to take a statistics course, which really was the most anxious period of my life. And I started doing crossword puzzles when I went to bed. And I think part of it is because I was working with all those numbers and formulas, and the words comforted me. But to this day, nearly 20 years later, I do a crossword puzzle every night before I go to bed, because you're so focused on the crossword puzzle and the words that other intrusive thoughts go out of your mind. Lastly, we need to make sure our patient or our friends, family, don't have other treatable sleep disorders. In the metabolic clinic, I have to count someday, but I'd say probably at least 50%, if not more, of my patients that I see with prediabetes, diabetes, obesity, hypertension have sleep apnea. And I read recently a very good article about sleep apnea and the mechanism in which it increases our risk for stroke. And a lot of it goes back to that microvascular damage that the hypoxia does while we sleep. Restless legs, usually treatable. Severe anxiety and depression, usually treatable. And then there's the whole topic chronic pain, which I don't have enough information to give you, but we certainly try lots of different things to help chronic pain, to give people a good night's sleep, like gabapentin and some of the tricyclics in low doses. So there's lots to be said about sleep. There's lots to be said about how we can help people about sleep, but I'd love to hear your all's ways to help yourself or your loved ones get a better night's sleep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Canarella Lorenzetti, for starting us off with a great conversation today. So now we will open it up for questions or comments and to continue the conversation. So if you have anything to say or ask, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask it out loud, or you can type it in the chat. You can send it to me. My name is Mia, and I'm a second-year medical student at WVU, or you can send it to everybody, and I'll make sure that it gets read out loud.
Dr.
Hi,
Steve,
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
me? Okay. I was going to
Yeah.
say, do you think that the racial differences have to do with just racial tensions and stress, racism, and those social determinants for sleep differences, most likely?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I was reading so many different articles about sleep over the past week, and that tidbit came up. And I can go back to the article and find the reference for that and give that to you, because I know that that is one of your areas of focus, right? The social determinants of health and paying attention to these things. And I thought that was a pretty 2 times as much. That's pretty impressive. It also said that they had a 60% chance of oversleep, which I thought was also interesting, because
Sure.
we don't really talk about oversleep.
Oversleep, yeah.
But there's some articles out there that talk about people that sleep 10 and 12 hours a day. That's kind of not normal either. And
Right.
usually there's some exogenous, or
Sure.
post surgery or whatever situation. But so I'll have to look into that a little more, because I thought it was an interesting. I mean, I try to ask everybody these questions, right?
Right.
It is part of our. We teach our culinary lifestyle track students that sleep should be a regular part of your review of systems.
Right.
There's not a trigger for it in the standard H&P outline, but so many diseases, I mean, have to do with sleep. But especially, it's interesting too, because strokes occur more in the African American population.
Right.
And
So-
I just read a beautiful article that was a review of sleep apnea and stroke. So I can send Mia some of these articles if they want to post them later. But I found this one particularly useful and interesting in talking about all the mechanisms that come into play with sleep apnea, because it's something that you really have to ask about. People don't often, people don't say, I snore, right? It's usually if they come in with the wife, or so you have to
Right.
check for that daytime sleepiness. But the article talked about after a stroke, the patient may not perceive that they have daytime sleepiness. And the article proposed that every patient with a stroke should be evaluated for sleep apnea, because they may not have the typical symptoms that would show up on an Epworth sleep test.
Thank you.
Any other hints from people about what they do when they're having trouble falling asleep that might benefit another person?
Dr. Lorenzetti, I have a question. It's Meg.
Okay.
Can you go a little bit more into, if someone's having trouble sleeping, are there certain foods like they should be avoiding, or maybe certain foods they can eat at night before they go to bed to help? I know you touched on it a little bit.
Yes, I did. And again, I didn't write down all those foods because I wasn't sure like how much time I would have to go into all of them. But I have a reference for that, because apparently there are some foods that have natural melatonin in them, which surprised me. But it was one of the articles that I saved to my desktop. So I certainly can, I mean, there's the obvious ones with tryptophan, but these were foods that they mentioned that had natural levels of melatonin. Now, what isn't real clear to me, I guess, is we know that light can decrease, you know, the melatonin, the blue light, and electronics. I don't know if there are other conditions besides those that would decrease a person's melatonin. I mean, those kinds of things are obvious. And why some people would feel like they need these mega doses, like 20 milligrams, or if the melatonin doesn't work, maybe it's because you're really not deficient in melatonin and something else is going on. But I can get you that article and you can read up on that.
Just in answer to your query, I know one condition that can cause issues with chronic insomnia, not necessarily because of melatonin, but because of lack of circadian rhythm, is actually blindness, especially congenital blindness. A lot of people who are congenitally blind will have chronic insomnia. I actually have a patient who was born with cataracts, and she has suffered from insomnia her entire life.
Wow, that's right. I forgot about that. They advertise it on TV now, right? Something like Sleep 24, or I forget what they call that, but
yeah, I remember seeing something like that.
I mean, one thing I didn't even address is shift work. And when I gave this similar talk to the family medicine residents, they were like, oh my God, that's our problem, is shift work. And to be honest, I know after I started practice and I was on call and I had a young baby, and I gained 80 pounds in about 6-7 years. And I'm sure, I mean, part of it is you're totally screwed up when you don't sleep well. When you're a healthcare provider and you're working in the emergency room, they keep all those lights blaring all night long, right? Because they want to keep everybody awake. So your body is just totally stimulated all night long. And then you think of the shift workers and how crazy their life can be. The patient I saw recently that told me her job was 2 days of 8 to 4, 2 days of 4 to 12, and 2 days from 12 to 8, 1 day off, and the cycle repeats. Like, who could possibly work like that? And, you know, we sit there and go, oh my God, you gotta stop that job. That's killing you. But, you know, it's a good paying job. And some people can't just stop jobs willy-nilly. So the whole shift worker complications and how we can fix somebody's work schedule is oftentimes beyond our control, but helping them to see that that might be what's making them ill is a place to start. Well, I know, Lauren, I know you've shared before one of your techniques at the end of the day, your journaling.
Yes, I've shared that before. Sometimes I find it helpful if you just write down, like, you could pick a number, but like 3 things that went well that day, or 3 good things that happened during the day before you go to bed.
Trying to focus on all of the things that went well instead of the things that are bothering us, that are preying on our mind. We did not talk about sleep meds. That's another whole topic as well. Dr. Walker talks a lot about sleep meds in his book and how they create an artificial sleep. His book goes into the different cycles of sleep, what happens in those different cycles of sleep, which I find very interesting. But I think our our quest is always to help people get a better night's sleep. And we start with asking the question.
We have a question in the chat. Okay, so the question is, do the seasonal effectiveness disorder lights work well as a replacement for the 2-hour sunlight needed in the winter?
I will say that one of the articles I read this week in preparation for this talk did say that those commercial lights, and I had a patient that kept hers in the kitchen because she spent a lot of time, preparing food and cleaning up the kitchen, etc. But the article did mention that those lights are a good substitute if you can't go outside during the day. So yes, I know they cost, if I recall, I remember looking those up with her, and they cost like under $100. But it is a special kind of light that mimics more sunlight, not just a fluorescent light.
I have something to add to that too. I just got off my psych rotation where we talked about that. And a comment that was made was with those lights was like, they are like natural daylight. So if you're going to use them, try to use it in the morning. Otherwise, it'll be like a bright light at night could keep you awake as well.
Yeah, so use them in the normal daylight hours is what you're saying.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Please do.
I'm a physical therapist. I work with a lot of chronic patients, some severely chronic. And the avenue for them is that they have abnormal breathing patterns. And they have abnormal breathing patterns because of the flexed posture that they have that brings them forward with activity. And it keeps the diaphragm down against the viscera. And because of that, the diaphragm doesn't work very efficiently in its operation unless you change the patient's center of gravity. So there are ways by which we can relax the patient on the table. It takes 5 minutes. And then we teach diaphragmatic breathing. So they're really concentrating on that activity for a short period of time to give the brain an opportunity to find the pattern of diaphragmatic breathing, to be able to increase their breath from below. And that has a significant effect on producing their relaxation and their ability to sense this release from a lot of tension. There's a device out, which I'm right now, and it's called DOW. And it's a small disc about 4 inches in diameter, and it has a little infrared light on it. You can press it for 8 minutes or 22 minutes, and it projects up on the ceiling. And on the ceiling, the light produces a circle so that when you breathe in, the circle expands. And when you breathe out, the circle gets smaller. So it allows the person to get into a rhythm of diaphragmatic breathing in a way by which it may be easier for them to relax and go to sleep. I'm just playing with it right now. My daughter's a physical therapist at WWAFD. She has one now too. And so we're just trying to see whether that will make a difference. But the whole aspect of breathing is important. There's a theory called polyvagal theory by Stephen Kozner that looks at ways by which you can improve the parasympathetic facilitation. And that's all connected, heart, lungs, together with breathing. And in chronic patients, when you reverse that issue, they have an excellent chance of moving forward, moving better, feeling better, and moving in the right direction.
That is really awesome points. I didn't quite hear the name of the device, so maybe you could type it in the chat so we could look into it.
Oh,
but
I'll get it to you guys.
Okay.
D is a dog. D is a dog. O D is in dog, O, W. You can look it up on the internet. But
Okay.
I'm an expert in reversing breathing patterns with this people, because when they stand up against gravity and they try and move and walk, their pulmonary function is diminished unless you do something about changing their center of gravity and giving them a more efficient way to move.
Great. Well, that sounds really, I mean, I understand what you're saying about the theory of what we can do to call on the parasympathetics. Even if you don't have this device, which sounds like it would be a great tool, because people like to work with tools, and it sounds like it gives you feedback depending on how the size of the circle changes. So I like that because people like to work with those. But
But
just, is that right?
it won't work. It will not work unless you retrain the breathing cycle before they ever use the device, because
Oh,
the
I
brain has
see.
it locked in, and so you have to get the brain to unlock the abnormal pattern. It doesn't take very long, and then you can put the device and show them how they can use it. Otherwise, they're going to go home and maybe have difficulty. But you have to change the abnormal breathing pattern in the brain, and that requires relaxation and a really simple but effective movement program to facilitate the diaphragm to move from a more neutral postural position. It doesn't take very long, but somebody has to teach you how to do it.
Right. I know, like, just even taking a very, very deep breath and increasing the intrathoracic pressure, and then breathing it out slowly, even something like that can call the vagus into action and slow down the heart rate. So you're right. I mean, you need some things that patients can do themselves, because not everybody has access to a specialist, but it's nice to know that specialists exist like yourself. Um, and if there's something that, you can teach the young doctors to do that we could help patients with, that would be great. Because all I know about are deep breathing and sort of the meditation,
Yeah.
deep muscle relaxation things.
Yeah, I think the key element here is that you have to be able to have the brain take over the pattern of breathing and understand it, get rid of the old pattern. And so it's really rewiring the brain, something it did earlier more efficiently, and reusing it again in this altered state. It's really brain mechanics that's involved with this, but it's not difficult brain science. I have a PhD in anatomy, and so I understand a lot about the brain and brain function, but it's really nice to watch these habitual breathing patterns change almost instantly with very, I can give you an example. The patient had severe back pain, 2 fibromyalgia, 2 failed back surgeries. And my partner said, there's only one person you can see, and that's Dr. Burkhart, because I can't help you. And I brought him in, I looked at him, and he could hardly walk. It took him 2 minutes to get from standing to lying down. I mean, an excruciating pain. And then I saw something, and I asked him, is there anything else you need to tell me? Well, his son-in-law killed his daughter, 2 grandchildren himself. That's heavy. That's really, really heavy. And all I did with him was be patient with him. I changed his breathing patterns, got him to relax, alter state, to move, and then he began to take control of himself. It only took a few days, and he was exercising. It's just the power of the brain to be able to look at itself and change something in a more positive direction. But they don't need to think about it. It is not exercise. It happens automatically if the brain recognizes the program and is willing to use it. Now I'll be quiet.
It sounds very interesting, and it sounds like you might have to give a more in-depth talk to some of the medical students, especially in the track, about this this technique and skill, and just so that they can know about it?
Yeah, well, Megan knows a lot about it because she's part of my genetics,
Great.
and she's at WVU,
Well, she'll,
and I'll be up there this summer for 3 weeks. So if you give me an opportunity to talk about it, I'd be happy to do
well,
it.
that sounds
I'm in Florida.
okay. Well, you could do it virtually if the timing doesn't work out when you're here. But thank you. That sounds really very interesting.
And your talk was very good. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Burkhart. Dr. C, I'm going to like kind of round out the hour with one more thing that I didn't think we talked about, but Meg and I are walking here together, and we were talking about how Meg likes to nap and I don't like to nap. And then we got a question in the chat that says, how does napping affect our sleep?
Right. Yeah, I read a little bit about nap as well. And a couple things that I read was a nap should be less than 30 minutes. And that when your nap goes prolonged, like 1 to 2 hours, now you've cycled through too many sleep cycles and you won't wake up feeling refreshed. So they said, and then some people even said to take a little caffeine before a nap. So if you say to yourself, I'm going to take a nap, I'm going to take a little cup of coffee, I'm going to set the clock for 25 minutes, and then the caffeine should be kicking in right when you wake up from your nap. Those are the two things that I read about naps. So that they should be short, and unless you are then the disclaimer was, unless you're a person that takes a nap every single day for 2 hours in the afternoon, then that's different, because that is your sleep pattern. And I have a lot of older adults that do that. What was your all's debate about?
So I do take like 25-minute naps because I like took caffeine out of my diet, and it helps me so much, like getting back to studying and not being drowsy, and it like powers me through the whole rest of the day. But Mia just doesn't like to do that. So it's just funny that, I don't know, it's so different. Wait, do you sleep 8 hours every night? Pretty much. Okay. Maybe like a little less. Okay, so maybe Meg sleeps a little bit less at night, and I always get it like at least 8 hours.
Right. Well, and I think what you're pointing out too is, we can talk about these generalities, right? But every single person is different about what their sleep requirement is, and when they're going to get that sleep. So we have to recognize that as well. We can only learn things in general as a way to begin to help people. And then I would say to you guys who feel, if you're feeling good and you're feeling rested, I mean, a lot of it is, the question is not so much in my mind, how much do you sleep? The question is, how do you feel when you wake up? Like, do you truly feel refreshed and ready to go? Or do you wake up still feeling lethargic? Because you can spend a lot of hours in bed and not be restored, right? Because of fragmented sleep, etc.
All right, well, we're getting close to the end of the hour. I want to wrap it up here and thank you, Dr. Canarella Lorenzetti, for leading the conversation today. Could you leave us with 3 takeaways from your talk? And then could you tell us something fun that you're looking forward to now that the weather is getting warmer?
Yes, so I think number 1, remember to include questions about sleep if you are a healthcare provider in any way to your patients, because apparently we don't do it enough, and that whole part of a person's health is being ignored. So number 1, remember to ask it. Number 2, take into consideration a couple of the very easiest remedies. And the first one is consistency. That is without a doubt the number 1 thing that most people recommend, is find the time to go to bed, wake up, and keep it, even on the weekends. Try not to allow yourself to to get into different kind of patterns on the weekends if you're having trouble with sleep. And number three, just think about all those other things in the environment and depending on what the problem is with the patient. So a lot of debate about the blue lights just starting to really be analyzed in the medical literature. These weighted blankets, I found that to be very curious and interesting new information for me. So I'm going to explore that. So always find something anytime you listen to a talk or a lecture that is an area of learning for yourself that you could go and look something up. So now that the weather is warmer, my favorite physical exercise is bicycling. I live 10 minutes from the C&O Canal, and I can get on it in a couple of different locations. And that is my favorite physical activity. And my second favorite one is kayaking. And I live pretty near the Shenandoah River and the Potomac. And I try to look for vacation areas that have access to lakes and things because kayaking, for some reason, I have good, strong upper arms and I really enjoy it. So that's what the weather is going to hold for me in the summer.
Awesome. I can say that you are a strong kayaker. I was exhausted the day you took us. So, but thanks so much for leading the conversation today.
You're welcome. I learned a lot every time I do something like this. So I hope people come away with 1 or 2 learning points themselves.
Yeah, me too. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. I'm glad you started your Saturday right, and hopefully you learned a little bit today. We're trying to see how far our program reaches. So if you wouldn't mind right now opening up the chat, typing who you are and where you're walking at, we would just love to see how far this program is reaching across West Virginia and across the country, maybe even across the world. Today's walk was audio recorded, and we will post it on our YouTube channel. So if you know anybody who would benefit from listening to the conversation today, send them over to our YouTube channel where they can listen to this and take a walk on their own schedule.
All right. Thank you, guys. See you.